The city lights shimmered below as the private jet landed quietly on the old runway. Inside sat Ethan Cross, one of the richest men in the country, a name known in business magazines and charity circles. Yet tonight, as he looked out of the window, there was no pride in his eyes, only silence. Only a man trying to return to a home that had stopped feeling like one long ago. It had been 10 years since Ethan last stepped into his mansion. After his wife Clara passed away, he buried himself in work. He told himself he was doing it for the children, to build them a future, to make their lives easy. But as time went by, he visited less and less. The house he once called home turned into a place of ghosts and memories. The only person who stayed through it all was Maria, the maid who had joined the family when the children were just babies. Ethan trusted her completely. She was quiet, humble, and loyal. He sent her double salaries, gifts, and bonuses over the years. But he never truly asked her how she was doing, or how the children were really living. He thought money was enough, but that night something changed inside him. Maybe it was the loneliness of his empty penthouse. Maybe it was the silence after all the applause at his last business event. He suddenly realized that while he had everything the world could offer, he had lost everything that truly mattered. So without telling anyone, Ethan booked a late flight back home. He wanted to see his children, Lily and Jacob, with his own eyes. He wanted to surprise them, maybe even make things right. When his black car stopped in front of the old mansion, his heart began to beat faster. The iron gates opened slowly, creaking like they were whispering about his long absence. The house stood tall under the moonlight, the same yet somehow different. He quietly stepped out, instructing the driver to stay silent. The cold wind brushed against his face as he walked toward the front door. He expected darkness and silence, the kind that used to fill the house when Clara died. But what he heard instead made him stop in his tracks. There was laughter. It wasn't just any laughter, and it was warm, soft, and full of life. It came from inside the kitchen, mixed with the sound of spoons and clinking plates. For a moment, Ethan couldn't move. That sound, that simple, joyful sound, was something he hadn't heard in this house for years. He opened the door quietly and stepped inside. The grand chandelier still hung in the hallway, shining dimly. The air smelled of something sweet. Vanilla, chocolate, and maybe cinnamon. He followed the smell, his footsteps slow and quiet, as if afraid to break the magic. When he reached the kitchen, he froze. There they were, his children. Lily, now 12, was standing on a small stool trying to spread frosting over a cake. Jacob, a little younger, was beside her, giggling as he stole pieces of chocolate from the table. And next to them stood Maria, flour on her hands, a smile on her face, gently helping them. They were laughing together, singing softly. The sight hit Ethan like a wave. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen them so happy, or the last time he had made them smile like that. For a few minutes he just stood there in silence, watching. He saw Maria wipe frosting from Lily's cheek and kiss her forehead like a mother would. He saw Jacob hand her a broken toy, and she fixed it with patience and love. Ethan felt something inside his chest tighten, guilt, regret, maybe longing. He had built empires, but this simple, warm scene made him realize what true richness looked like. It wasn't money nor power. It was love. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, afraid to make a sound. For the first time in 10 years, Ethan Cross, the billionaire everyone envied, felt poor in front of his own home. And as he stood there, watching his children and the woman who raised them, he whispered softly to himself, "What have I done?" Ethan stood quietly by the kitchen doorway, watching the scene unfold before him. The warmth in that room felt unreal, as if it belonged to another world. He had built companies, managed thousands of workers, and faced crowds that clapped for him. Yet in this simple kitchen, filled with laughter and light, he felt like an outsider. His eyes followed Maria as she moved around the table. She wasn't dressed like a rich housekeeper. Her apron was worn out, her hands looked tired, and there were faint lines on her face. But there was something pure and kind in her expression, something money could never buy. She was laughing with the children, singing an old song Clara used to sing when she was alive. Ethan's heart ached. That song used to fill this home when life was simpler, when Clara would bake cookies on Sunday mornings and the kids would play on the floor. Now hearing Maria hum those same words made him realize how much time had slipped away from him, time he could never get back. He took a step forward, but the floor creaked softly beneath his shoe. Maria turned suddenly. For a moment she froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Mr. Cross?" she whispered, almost not believing what she saw. Her hand trembled as she held the spoon. Ethan took a deep breath. "Hello, Maria," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." Maria blinked back tears. "Sir, you're home?" Her voice broke halfway. Before Ethan could reply, two small figures ran toward him. "Daddy!" Lily cried, her voice filled with pure joy. Jacob followed, tripping over his little feet, laughing and crying at the same time. Ethan dropped to his knees as his children threw their arms around him. For a moment the world stopped. He hugged them tightly, breathing in their scent, the scent of home. He hadn't realized how much he missed them until now. His throat tightened as he whispered, "I missed you both so much." Lily's voice was muffled against his chest. "We missed you too, Daddy. Maria said you were working hard for us." Ethan looked up at Maria, his eyes softening. She stood near the counter, tears rolling down her cheeks as she tried to smile. The sight broke him even more. He had left them all, left her to carry everything alone. He picked up Jacob in his arms, holding him close. The boy's small hands clung to his father's shirt as if afraid he'd disappear again. Ethan kissed his forehead and said, "I'm here now. I promise I'm not going anywhere." The children didn't understand the weight behind those words, but Maria did. She turned away, covering her mouth as silent tears escaped her eyes. After a few minutes, the children went back to their cake, excitedly showing Ethan the messy frosting they had made. He smiled, truly smiled for the first time in years. "You made this?" he asked, pretending to be surprised. "Yes!" Lily giggled. "We make one every year for your birthday, even when you don't come home." Ethan's smile faded slightly. Every year? They had waited for him, even when he never showed up. His chest tightened painfully. Maria noticed his expression and spoke softly. "They never forgot you, sir, no matter how long you were gone." Her words pierced him like a knife, not in anger, but in truth. He looked at her and said, "You kept them believing in me, when I didn't deserve it." Maria shook her head gently. "They needed hope, sir, and I couldn't let them lose that." For a while, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of the children's laughter. Ethan looked around and saw the house differently now. Not as a mansion, but as a home someone had worked hard to keep alive. As the night grew deeper, he watched Maria tidy the kitchen, humming softly. She wasn't just a maid, she was the reason this place still felt alive. She had carried the heart of the family when he had walked away. Ethan sat quietly, watching her with eyes full of regret and gratitude. And in that moment, he realized the truth. Maria hadn't just taken care of his children. She had taken care of his soul, the one he had left behind years ago. He looked at her and thought silently, "I came back to surprise them, but it's me who's truly been surprised." That night, after the children went to sleep, the house grew quiet again. The soft ticking of the clock filled the living room. Ethan sat alone near the fireplace, staring at the flickering flames. The warmth touched his skin, but his heart still felt cold. It had been a perfect evening. The children's laughter still echoed in his ears. Yet behind that joy, Ethan felt a deep ache, an ache that came from guilt. He looked at the family photos on the wall. Clara's picture was still there, smiling gently, holding Lily as a baby. Dust had gathered on the frame, but her eyes still carried that same kindness. Ethan reached out and touched the photo. His fingers trembled slightly. It had been 10 years, but her last words still haunted him like they were said yesterday. Promise me, she had whispered, lying weakly in that hospital bed. Promise me you'll be there for them, Ethan. Not with money, but with love. They need their father. At the time, he had nodded through tears, but after she passed away, everything inside him broke. He couldn't bear to walk through this house. Every corner reminded him of her. The kitchen, the garden, even the smell of her perfume in the hallway. It all felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. So, he ran. He buried himself in work, in meetings, in endless flights and hotel rooms. He told himself he was doing it for his children, but deep down he knew the truth. He was running from his pain. Now, sitting in his old home again, Ethan finally saw what his escape had cost him. He had missed birthdays, school events, and late-night talks. His children had grown up without knowing the warmth of their father's arms. Maria had filled that empty space with her love, but it should have been him. Tears gathered in his eyes. He whispered softly, "Clara, I failed you. I failed them." At that moment he heard quiet footsteps behind him. It was Maria, holding a cup of tea. She stopped when she saw him sitting there, lost in thought. "Sir," she said gently, "you should rest. It's been a long day." Ethan wiped his eyes quickly and nodded. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "This house, it feels like her. Every corner reminds me of Clara." Maria smiled sadly. "She was a wonderful woman. She loved this home. She loved you." He looked at her, pain showing in his tired eyes. "And I couldn't even keep her last promise." Maria walked closer and placed the cup beside him. "You did what you thought was right," she said softly. "People grieve differently. Some cry. Some run away. But what matters is that you came back. That takes courage, sir." Ethan looked down. "Courage?" he repeated. "No, Maria. You were the brave one. You stayed. You raised them. You gave them everything I should have given." She shook her head slowly. "They are your children. They always asked about you. Every night before bed, Lily used to say, 'Maybe Daddy will come tomorrow.' And Jacob would leave his toy cars by the door for you. They never stopped waiting." Her words broke him completely. Ethan covered his face with his hands and his shoulders shook silently. For years, he had imagined his children growing up happy and safe, but now he realized they had been growing up waiting. Maria placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's not too late, sir," she said quietly. "They still love you. You can still give them what money never could." He looked up at her, his eyes wet, but determined. "I don't even know how to begin," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "Start by being here. That's enough." The fire crackled softly, filling the silence between them. Ethan turned back toward Clara's photo, his heart heavy but a little warmer. For the first time in years, he didn't think about business, success, or power. He only thought about the promise he had broken, and how he could finally make it right. As the clock struck midnight, Ethan whispered again, "I'll keep my promise this time, Clara. I'll be the father they deserve." And as the fire glowed, softly in the room, a single tear rolled down his cheek. Not from pain, but from the small spark of hope returning to his heart. The next morning, the sunlight slowly filled the mansion. For years, the house had known silence and emptiness, but that day, the light felt different, warmer, gentler, almost as if the walls were finally breathing again. Ethan woke up early, unable to sleep. He stood near the balcony, watching the garden below. The same garden where Clara used to plant roses. The same garden where Lily had taken her first steps. But now, he saw something new. Maria was out there with the children. Lily was chasing butterflies while Jacob was watering the small plants. Maria knelt beside them, showing them how to pull out weeds carefully. Their laughter carried through the morning air. It was such a simple scene, yet it touched Ethan more deeply than any luxury he had ever owned. He walked downstairs quietly and stepped out into the garden. The moment his shoes touched the grass, Maria looked up, surprised. She quickly stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, almost shyly. "Good morning, Maria," Ethan replied. His voice was calm, but heavy with unspoken words. Lily ran to him immediately, holding a tiny flower. "Daddy, look what I found," she said proudly. Ethan smiled and knelt to her level. "It's beautiful," he said, tucking the flower gently behind her ear. "You look just like your mother when you smile." Lily giggled, not fully understanding, but Ethan's eyes turned watery as he looked at her. She had Clara's gentle smile and bright eyes. It was like seeing a piece of his wife again. Jacob tugged on his father's hand. "Daddy, can you play with us?" he asked eagerly. Ethan hesitated for a moment. He hadn't played with them since they were small, but then he nodded with a soft smile. "Of course," he said. Maria watched quietly as Ethan joined the children. They played catch, ran across the grass, and laughed freely. At one point, Ethan stumbled and fell, and the children burst out laughing. He laughed too, a real laugh, one that came from his heart. Maria stood under the shade, tears glistening in her eyes. She had waited so long to see this, the children with their father, happy and whole. After a while, when the children ran inside to get some juice, Ethan walked toward Maria. They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the wind moving gently through the trees. "You kept everything alive," Ethan said quietly. "The garden, the house, and them." Maria looked down, her voice humble. "I only did what was right, sir. They needed care, and I couldn't let Clara's memory fade." Ethan's gaze softened. "You didn't just care for them, Maria. You became their family. You gave them love when I couldn't." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I did what any mother would," she whispered. "I know they're not mine, but I love them as if they were." Her words struck Ethan deeply. He felt both guilt and gratitude flooding through him. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "You gave them what I should have given." Maria shook her head. "You don't need to thank me, sir. Just be here now, that's all they want." For a moment, they stood quietly, the sun shining softly on both of them. Ethan looked around, at the flowers blooming in the garden, at the laughter coming from inside the house, and he realized how much he had missed. He took a deep breath and said, "I thought money could build happiness, but it can't. You did that with patience, love, and kindness." Maria smiled gently. "Children don't need riches, Mr. Cross. They just need someone who stays." Ethan looked at her, his heart heavy but calm. "And you stayed," he whispered. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Because they needed me. And maybe, in some way, I needed them too." For a long moment they both stood silently, watching the sunlight touch the flowers. Ethan realized he wasn't just looking at his children's caretaker. He was looking at the reason his home still had life, warmth, and love. In that quiet morning, among the laughter of children and the smell of roses, Ethan Cross, the man the world called powerful, felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt peace. That evening the house was filled with the smell of food, something it hadn't felt in years. The kitchen was alive again. Pots clattered, the oven hummed softly, and the sound of laughter echoed through the halls. Ethan sat at the dining table watching Maria and the children move around the kitchen. Lily was setting the plates carefully, counting each one in her small hands. Jacob was carrying spoons and forks with his serious little face. trying not to drop anything, and Maria, as always, moved between them like sunlight, calm, gentle, and full of love. Ethan leaned back, his eyes soft. He had eaten at the world's finest restaurants, but this simple meal felt more precious than all of them combined. He could see Clara in the way Maria guided the children, in the way the room felt warm and safe. When they all sat down together, Lily clasped her hands. "Daddy, we always say a thank you before dinner," she said proudly. Ethan blinked in surprise. "Oh? I didn't know that." Maria smiled faintly. "It's something we started a few years ago. It helps them remember what really matters." Lily closed her eyes and began softly. "Thank you for our food. Thank you for our home. And thank you for keeping us together." Jacob added in his tiny voice, "And thank you for bringing Daddy back." Ethan's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. Maria looked down, trying to hide her tears. The silence that followed was filled with emotion, the kind that didn't need words. They began to eat, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a guest in his own house. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of plates, it all felt like music to his heart. As the meal went on, Ethan noticed how easily the children talked to Maria, how they shared stories, laughed about small things, and asked her questions like she was their mother. At first it hurt him to realize how close they were to her, but soon that hurt turned into gratitude. "Maria," Ethan said softly, "you've done more than I ever could. You didn't just take care of them. You raised them." Maria looked down, embarrassed. "I just did what needed to be done, sir." Ethan shook his head. "No, you did much more. You gave them love. You gave them happiness when I gave them distance. You filled this house with life again." Her eyes glistened. "I only wanted them to grow up kind and loved. That's what Clara wanted." Ethan's gaze softened at the mention of his late wife's name. "Clara would be proud of you," he said quietly. "You became their light when mine went out." Maria's lips trembled. "She was my friend, sir. Before she passed, she asked me to never leave the children. I promised her I would stay. And I did." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He whispered, "And I left." "You kept the promise I broke." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the children laughing at the end of the table. Ethan watched them, their innocent faces glowing under the soft light, and he finally understood what he had been blind to for so long. Love wasn't about grand gestures or money. It was about being there, about giving warmth and time. Maria had given all of that. He looked at her again, his voice filled with emotion. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." Maria smiled gently. "You don't owe me anything, sir. Just be here now. That's all they need." Ethan nodded slowly, his heart heavy yet hopeful. For the first time, he felt like a father again. Not the man who bought his children gifts from afar, but the man who could finally give them his presence. As the dinner ended, the children ran off to play, leaving Ethan and Maria alone at the table. The air was quiet but peaceful. Ethan looked around the room, the soft lights, the half-eaten cake, the warmth still lingering in the air, and then he realized something. For years he thought he had lost his family. But now, sitting there, he understood the truth. He hadn't lost them. He had just stopped coming home, and tonight home had finally welcomed him back. That night the house was quiet again. The children had fallen asleep after playing and laughing for hours. The moonlight slipped through the curtains, touching the walls softly. Ethan sat alone in the living room, the faint sound of the clock ticking beside him. He stared at the family photo on the table. Clara, Maria, and the two children standing together during Lily's first birthday. He smiled weakly. "You kept us together even when I wasn't here," he whispered to the photo, his voice trembling. A few minutes later, Maria walked in. She was holding a folded blanket. ready to cover the children who had fallen asleep on the couch. When she saw Ethan sitting there, she stopped. "You're still awake, sir?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts in my head." Maria walked closer and sat across from him, keeping her hands folded in her lap. She could see the exhaustion in his face, not from work but from years of holding everything inside. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with things that had never been said. Then Ethan finally broke it. "Maria," he began slowly, his voice low and emotional. "I've been a fool." Maria looked up surprised. "Sir?" "I thought being a good father meant giving them everything they wanted. The best school, the best house, the best life. But I see now. What they needed wasn't my money. They needed me." His voice cracked as he continued. "I left them when they needed me most. I left you to carry everything alone. I should have been here when Clara passed. I should have held their hands through it. Instead, I buried myself in work, pretending success would heal the pain. But it didn't. It only made me emptier." Maria's eyes softened. "You were hurting too, sir. Losing Clara broke all of us." Ethan shook his head. "You stayed strong. You didn't run." "I did." He looked down, his eyes wet with regret. "You became their world, Maria. You became the one constant in their lives. And I can never thank you enough for that." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she whispered, "Sir, I only did what your wife asked me to. She wanted the children to grow up in love, not loneliness. I couldn't let her wish fade away." Ethan lifted his head, his voice filled with emotion. "And you kept that promise better than I ever could. You gave them love. You gave them hope. You gave them the meaning of home." Tears formed in Maria's eyes. "They're your children, sir. They always asked about you. They waited for you every birthday, every holiday. They never stopped believing that one day you would come back." Her words cut deep into Ethan's heart. He placed his hand over his face, trying to hide the tears. "I don't deserve their love." "Or yours," he said brokenly. Maria stood slowly and walked closer. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You do," she said softly, "because you came back. And that's what matters now. The past can't be changed, but the present can heal it." Ethan looked up at her, eyes full of emotion. "I don't know how to make it right," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "Start by being here. Every morning, every night. Read them stories. Listen to their laughter. Love them, sir. That's all they ever wanted." Her voice trembled at the end, but it carried warmth. Ethan nodded slowly, wiping his tears. "I promise, Maria, no more running. No more excuses. I'll be here and for them, and for this home." Maria gave a small, grateful smile. That's all Clara ever wanted too. For a long moment they both stood silently, the weight of years lifting between them. Outside, the moonlight poured through the window, washing the room in a gentle glow. Ethan looked around. The sleeping children, the photos on the wall, the woman who had carried his family through darkness, and realized something deep. Sometimes love doesn't wait for grand apologies. It just needs someone to finally come home. And that night, for the first time in 10 long years, Ethan Cross felt the peace of forgiveness, not from others, but from his own heart. The morning light slowly filled the mansion, touching every corner with warmth that hadn't been felt in years. The smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen, followed by the sound of laughter. Real, pure laughter. Ethan stood quietly at the doorway watching. Maria was helping little Lily pour syrup on her pancakes while Sam was showing her a drawing he made. "It's our family," the boy said proudly. "See, that's me, Lily, you and—" He paused for a moment, then smiled wide. "And Dad?" Maria turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting Ethan's. For a moment, everything went still. Just a silent exchange between two hearts that had carried too much for too long. Ethan walked in slowly, still unsure how to fit into this warm little picture, but Lily saw him first. "Daddy!" she cried with joy, jumping off her chair and running to him. He caught her in his arms, lifting her high. Her laughter filled the air. "You're home again," she said, holding his face with her tiny hands. "You promised last night, right? You won't leave anymore?" Ethan's voice broke as he nodded. "Never again, sweetheart. Never again." He looked over at Sam, who was pretending to focus on his plate. "Hey, champ," Ethan said softly. "That drawing. It's beautiful." Sam looked up, hesitated, then smiled shyly. "You really like it?" "I love it," Ethan said.
Can I keep it?
The boy nodded, his eyes bright. "Only if you promise to be in it for real." Ethan's throat tightened. "I promise." They shared a quiet moment. A small bridge built between a father and son who had missed too many years. Maria watched them silently, her heart full. She had seen these children cry themselves to sleep. Now seeing them smile again made her eyes wet. Later that day, Ethan gathered everyone in the garden. The place was overgrown and forgotten, much like his family had been. But as sunlight fell on the green grass, something in him wanted to start over, to rebuild. He looked at Maria and said, "This garden used to be Clara's favorite place. She used to say it was where love bloomed. Maybe it's time to bring it back." Maria nodded with a soft smile. "Then let's plant something new." The children ran around laughing, helping them dig small holes for the plants. Ethan's hands, once used to signing business contracts, were now covered in soil. But he didn't care. Each seed he placed in the ground felt like a piece of his heart finding its way home. As the sun began to set, Ethan stood with Maria, watching the children chase butterflies. "You gave them happiness," he said quietly. "When I couldn't," Maria looked down, her voice gentle. "You gave them life, sir. I just helped them keep it warm." Ethan turned to her, eyes full of gratitude. "You're more than that, Maria. You're the reason they still believe in family, and I'll never forget what you've done for them." She smiled softly, though her eyes glistened. "All I wanted was for them to have love, just like Clara wished." There was silence for a moment. The wind carried the sweet scent of flowers, and somewhere a bird sang. Ethan felt tears form again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from peace. He looked toward the sky and whispered, "Clara, we're home again." That night, the house glowed with warmth. The children slept peacefully the way they hadn't in years. Ethan stood by their doors, watching them with a father's quiet pride. Then he walked to the living room where Maria was folding laundry. "You don't have to call me sir anymore," he said gently. Maria looked at him, puzzled. "Then what should I call you?" He smiled softly. "Just Ethan, just family." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Welcome home, Ethan." He looked around one last time. The laughter, the peace, the love. And he finally understood what real wealth was. It wasn't the money, the company, or the fame. It was this. The sound of children's laughter. The kindness of a woman who never gave up. The feeling of coming home after being lost for too long. And in that moment, Ethan Cross, the billionaire who once had everything but love, realized he had finally found the one thing money could never buy. A family healed by forgiveness.